Hey, I'm Rachael.
And I'm Amanda, and this is Beyond a Ballot.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 2 of the Beyond a Ballot podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Alvaro, here with my co-host, Rachael Siegel. Hi, Rachael.
Hello, Amanda. How are you?
So good. So excited. We are so excited, really excited, because today we are throwing a dinner party of sorts. And the reason why is because there's no dinner, unfortunately, but we may send a little
3 o'clock
food
in
item.
the afternoon.
Yeah, it's true.
3 o'clock.
But we had this conversation in episode 1, this idea that sometimes we sit around a dinner table, and depending on who's around that table, if they aren't our long-term political friends, we may not have the conversation about politics. And we started suggesting that maybe there's this idea that we could invite more of our friends into the conversation. So this is our first quote-unquote dinner party.
You suggested. You came to me and said, why don't we throw a dinner party? And you know I'm always down for dinner. So I was like, yeah. But then I didn't realize it would be virtual. But we are trying. We are hosting this dinner party coast to coast. I'm in Vancouver. You're in Toronto. And we also have some guests with us, but we're going to introduce them in a second. Do you want to tell who our friends are here?
Introduce them. Okay. Go for it. Yeah.
Well, let me start with Kathleen Monk, who is a principal at Monk and Associates and also a household name for many, many of us. Hello, Kathleen. We're so happy to have you.
Happy to be here. Would be happier if there was food, but I'll roll with it.
Did anyone bring wine? I suggested a glass of wine. Maybe it's 12 o'clock in Vancouver, so maybe I'll grab one. Okay, next we have Laura D'Angelo, who is Vice President of National Strategy and Public Affairs at Enterprise Canada. Hi, Laura.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us. And last but not least, Amanda Galbraith, who is a principal at Navigator and here with us today. I was going to say, and a new mom, but I didn't want to out you on the air.
That's all right. It's like my new defining feature. I barely survived it, but I am.
You know what I was thinking? I think all of us are moms. All of us here. So that's pretty cool that we all want to have dinner and chat about politics. I think that's awesome. All right.
So we thought instead of doing the deep dive on your bios ourselves, we would ask you to share a couple of things. So here's my question to you. My question is, it's an easy one. How did you get involved in politics? Or what was the catalyst? What is your affiliation? Because everybody is going to ask if you feel comfortable sharing it. And maybe one little thing that has nothing to do with politics. And I'm going to throw to Kathleen to start.
How did I get involved in politics? I think technically the answer to that would have to be in grade 2. I started a petition at my church because I really wanted to be an altar girl, and the priest had said no. So I don't know if anybody remembers foolscap, that long paper with all the lines, and I filled, I think, 4 sheets of it with names from my community, making the argument that it just made no sense and that I was going to church anyhow. So why couldn't I just show up and help out? I wasn't successful in that. But at the time, my mom taught me this great lesson, which is like you can bang on the doors from the outside, or you can kind of work within institutions to kind of make change. And so, that many, many years later, I got into journalism, worked in Toronto and Ottawa and later Washington, and really fell into politics, covered a lot of politics, some interesting fights, Chrétien and the creation of the Canadian Alliance and eventually the Conservative Party. So saw a lot of those really interesting transitions, but then eventually took the leap and joined politics directly, working for Jack Layton, the New Democrats, started in the mid 2000s and worked with him up until he passed in 2011. And then since that time have been working either in nonprofits and primarily as a consultant. And right now I like to consider myself, I think my colleagues on this podcast may relate to this. I call myself a bit of a parapolitical operative, no longer directly involved in politics, but I'm shooting from the sidelines a little bit, like in the bushes, still have lots of opinions and trying to take out my opponents where I can with either good policy, good politics, or great persuasive communication. So that's kind of me.
I love that. That's
Having
so
known
good.
Kathleen for the better part of a decade, it does not surprise me for 1 second that you had a petition in grade 2. Not 1 second. That was great. Laura, were you petitioning anyone in your early childhood years in elementary school?
I was not. I was one of those people who completely fell into politics back when the Liberals were in third party. So I will out myself as a partisan Liberal. I was an event manager, an event planner working the gala circuit and planning public policy conferences, and wanted to get back to fundraising. And a friend sent me a link to a job posting and said, Justin Trudeau's never going to be prime minister, but at least it's a name brand on your resume. And the rest is history, as they say.
Wow.
But I fell in love with it as soon as I started. I remember coming home and talking to my then fiance, now husband, and I looked at him after probably 2 weeks and said, I think we're in trouble. Like I like this a little too much. And really, I've never left. Now I do exactly what Kathleen described, which is stand on the sidelines and shout. I'm very much a member of the Peanut Gallery and proudly love it.
I often hear that once you work in politics, you can never work anywhere else because it's so exciting.
Right? It's just like, it's such an adrenaline rush. There's so much happening and everyone's so passionate. Like, it's not just on your team. Everybody you work with on all sides of the house love it. And that is so much fun.
We also keep hearing this word accidental, like accidentally falling into politics, which I think is so funny because it's such an intentional place to be in many ways. But the fact that people fall into it accidentally, I think, is something that we should explore on another episode, Rachel.
Agreed.
Okay, Amanda, how about you? Tell us the goods.
I did not start as young as Kathleen. I wasn't doing it in grade 2. But in grade 7, I went to French school. And my teacher was a separatist, and I was greatly offended by this. So I, in my shit disturbing ways, even as like a nerdy student, made a poster of a heart with one side was the fleur de lis flag, like the Quebec flag. One side was the Canadian flag, and it was like Ensemble nous sommes forts. And I like demanded he put it up in the classroom.
Wow.
Which went over really well. And anyway, he did, but my parents had to like speak to the anyway, it was a bit of a. Anyway, I was always a bit of, so that was my start.
That's
but
really
I never
insightful for grade 7.
I was a bit ridiculous. Hasn't really
That's why
changed.
we love you.
And then I didn't actually I wanted to be a journalist and went to J school at Carleton. And then a friend of mine was involved with Stephen Harper. Well, got involved with poli-sci. I double majored with poli-sci. And he was like, I'm going to go to phone bank for Stephen Harper and volunteer. Do you want to come? And I was like, absolutely not. I was like, not. Like, I had a George Bush American Psycho t-shirt. Like, I was like, no way. But I'm like, what would be a good idea? If I get in politically and like volunteer and figure out how it works. So when I become a political reporter, I'll like know. And I just ended up really liking it and interning and volunteering and learning more about policy and that kind of thing. So I ended up as a writer in the all through university, like working part-time. I worked on the 2004 election campaign and the 2006 election campaign as an intern. And then luckily the 2006 campaign happened and we won government in my last semester of university. So I was like, I could go be a journalist or I could go work in the PMO. So I went to work in the PMO and the rest is sort of history. So
do you ever think about going back? I mean, you have a radio show, but do you ever go back and think, oh, I should have been a journalist?
No, I know. I mean, no. I wouldn't have the. I mean, it'd be fun, but I like nice things too much, and like I love my journalism friends. Like I admire the work they do; they're amazing, but they do not get paid half as much as they should for the work that they do and how like important their job is. So I just no, not at all. I'm very happy with my life path.
Well, what a time to be graduating right at the turn of the government. That's amazing.
Very lucky.
Okay, so. The feedback that I got, I don't know about you, Amanda, but people kept saying to me, I love the concept of this podcast because you get to talk politics, but you're nice to each other. And I think that I think the beauty of this dinner party, as we are sitting here eating our dinner, just kidding, is that we all have really different political backgrounds and everybody's worked for different politicians and although we all work in the same field, we probably had really different experiences. So what better group to talk about the House of Commons coming back than this? Big news, Peg, this week. The House resumed. What does it mean? If I am just hearing this on the news and I'm like, what house and why is it resuming and where have they been? Kathleen, can you tell us what somebody who would know nothing about politics should know about the House resuming?
Yeah, well, it's kind of, most Canadians would be familiar with it in some sense, because September for many of us feels like a bit of a renewal, right? The kids go back to school, you know, the fall, the seasons start to change. And also Parliament comes back. And so what that means, in the same way that teachers and children are often off for the summer, MPs also don't have to sit in Parliament in Ottawa during that time. So the House recesses a few times of the year. Certainly the summer months are one of them, over Christmas break. And then they take, sporadic breaks throughout the year too. But technically, unlike teachers or students, they can't just go off to camp or go on holiday, because theoretically they're working, the MPs are working in their ridings throughout the summer, going to the barbecue circuit, that kind of stuff.
And
but
I think that is such an important point to emphasize, because a lot of times we hear, Parliament's recessing. So everyone thinks that the parliamentarians pack up, get on planes, and then we don't see them until the House comes back in the fall. But really, what are they doing?
Well, if they're in their ridings, you're actually going to see more of them, hopefully. And that's the idea, that they're actually in the community, working with constituents, talking to voters, getting out. Because some of these ridings, let's not forget, are massive. There's some Northern Ontario ridings and some ridings in BC, and certainly in the territories that are, thousands and hundreds and hundreds of kilometers wide, right? So to travel across them sometimes takes a day and a half. So they're getting out there, they're visiting the constituents, but there is an excitement, I just got to say, when Parliament is back, not only because there's a rush of all these people back in the nation's capital, in the city of Ottawa, but just like you do when you go back to school, you got your new backpack, you got your new lines, like people are getting ready and they're thinking of all the funny quips and the bombastic kind of questions they're going to ask in question period. And so kind of people are, their shiniest and brightest and sometimes most toxic in the first couple of days back in the House.
Can you dive into that for me for 1 second and just, what does that mean, most toxic? What do you mean by that?
Well, question period by its very nature, and the House of Commons by its very nature, is combative. Literally, it's a couple sword lengths, they say, in between the government and the opposition side. And you really do have to kind of focus your messaging, and that leads to those kind of toxic or bombastic lines, because in question period, which is the main event, if you will, in the House of Commons, that hour of questions that happens between 2 p.m. Eastern and 3 p.m. Most days of the week, Monday to Thursday. It's a little bit earlier on Friday. But when that question period happens, remember, the opposition has 35 seconds. That's it. 35 seconds. Amanda and Laura and I know, because we're all writers, that frankly, that's like maybe 75 words up to 110 if you're a really fast read. 35 seconds to pound out a lot of facts and a lot of questions is hard. So that's where the craft and the skill of political communicators, like all the women that are on this podcast right now, really comes into practice. How you can hone those words, sharpen those verbs, or come up with great analogies or factoids, and that's kind of why things can get a bit toxic, in the House.
And Amanda, having worked in government before, question for you, for those who are listening, this idea of a new parliamentary session and the significance of the new parliamentary session. Can you talk about that for a moment?
Yeah, I think it's, Kathleen kind of touched on it. It's sort of all the parties' chance to dust themselves off, turn the page a little bit. I think in particular, you saw the Liberal government really come out I felt like they were half dead all summer long. And all of a sudden it's demanding grocery CEOs come to town. We've got we're reforming this act. We've passed bill reform, which people have been demanding for years. Where did this come from? So usually parties kind of come in with a big plan. We've got a message. Typically they'll get a couple good weeks out of not being knocked off. This has been a very interesting week. Usually the House coming back is its own news entity, but I'd say it's the fifth down the list from, India and so you saw kind of the PM get knocked off. Frankly, what I would argue is probably their affordability message on day 2 around that. So yeah, but I think there's an opportunity for all of the parties to come. Here's our playbook. People are paying attention. This is a new session. What are we doing? What policies what's the first piece of legislation we're going to be tackling? What's our first private members bill? So the Conservatives, for example, are introducing their Housing Act, or whatever they're calling it. I forget. There's a snappier communications term, which I have lost. So it's certainly an opportunity for all sides to go at it. I would say the Liberals probably, to my mind, came out the strongest, but I think they had the most to reach up for. And then the Conservatives certainly continue to kind of, I think, coast on what was a great summer for them, and I think could potentially be a good fall.
Okay, I want to dive into what happened this summer. But before we do that, I want to ask you, Laura, what do you think is the most pressing? And I'll open it up afterwards to anybody else that wants to answer. But what is the most pressing issue that's facing this parliamentary session? Because I agree with Amanda in that, the Liberals came in with a message, and when I was thinking about that last week, affordability was top of mind, and wow, did that go sideways this week? What is the number one most pressing issue in your mind for this session?
The number one most pressing issue is affordability. It's housing and affordability across the board still. And I would actually say this was one of the most interesting starts of Parliament, because it was a really structured and disciplined start, at least on the part of the government, which I thought was actually quite fascinating. I don't think the start of Parliament is always that disciplined, right? They have lots of things they want to do, but lots of things you want to do doesn't always translate to, we are going to stick to one message the entire week. Right. But the other thing Amanda talked about that I thought was really interesting, that, maybe someone else remembers, to my recollection, has never really happened before, was the Prime Minister standing up in the House of Commons and announcing, an alleged foreign attack on a Canadian, which was an interesting use of the House of Commons, right? A way to avoid media questions on something that he couldn't really answer questions about. And two, was pretty jaw-dropping. I think a lot of us here probably talked to people who had their media pass and were in the gallery. That's what we call the area you can watch question period from. We're in the gallery watching, and some of those journalists who have been around Ottawa for 40 plus years said they have never seen anything like that. And I think that's the other reason Parliament this year in particular has started off with such a bang.
And what do you anticipate as we move on from this week? Obviously, Parliament will continue a long session. Anything else that you're anticipating coming up? We're going to dive into India in a few minutes, but in terms of the parliamentary session,
I think it's going to be affordability and housing across the board. And I think every party is going to try and tie every question, every issue back to it.
Anyone else disagree? Want to add?
I do think bail reform and community safety is going to continue to kind of bubble around, especially as you see big active. It's not maybe the big sexy headline right now, but if there's a spate of shootings or an attack again in Vancouver or Toronto, I think, already there's some policy discussion around, is it enough? So I think they can point to some action finally, but I'm not sure if that's going to satisfy folks. So I think that's an issue for all politicians, but they're all pointing at the feds.
Yeah, and I think there's more pressure mounting from provincial governments also on that file. Kathleen, anything to add there?
Yeah, I would just add, I agree with my colleagues for sure, but I would just add that it's important to think of, when we say affordability, there's also another economic pillar, just the economy overall, right? Because we've had a lot of, some growing negative signals from the economy. We've seen a slight uptick in unemployment, including specifically for women, older women particularly. So it's nice we have to pay attention to that. And then just looking at, how our economy is doing overall, and if we slip into recession. So I know we've been kind of saying that that's been a possibility for almost 18 months, a little bit longer now, but it could actually trip over in the next 6 months or so, and then watching for that. So affordability on a personal level, so people's personal economics. And then I think we have to think about the economy at a macro level. And that means all those things, all those signals we've talked about, but also just how Canada can maintain its credit rating and its own balance sheet, et cetera.
We spent a lot of the summer talking about affordability and housing. We spent a lot of the year talking about it. But the topic that was very much in the headlines in the last session was foreign interference. Does that topic resume its place in the number one spot, or have other issues taken priority now? Anyone
Especially
have a thought
given
on that?
India too, right?
Yes.
This week.
I think it will continue to be the number one story for the next little bit, mostly because now we're seeing the shakeout of what this means. So pausing all visa how does this impact Canadians? And also Canadians are now, candidly, even myself, like I was notionally aware of some of the politics of like the Indian diaspora, but like I've been trying to delve into it to understand it, and good Lord, I'm calling friends and trying to figure out. So I think people are trying to understand that. So I think the idea of the inquiry was supposed to quell this story. I think, and I also think to candidly, I'll just call this like, it's too, the conversation to date has been the prime minister's on life support, the government's on life support, they've lost their whatever, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You can agree or disagree with that, but that has been a narrative that they've been, if you walked on water, they'd say you couldn't swim, right? Like that was just where it was. All of a sudden we saw the PM stand up on Tuesday, throw a haymaker in the House of Commons and attack India, like just bluntly go after, and rightly or wrongly, and people are arguing both sides. So I think it's to his benefit to pick a big fight, to be on the attack. It's driving a narrative away from all of that coverage. So I think you'll see them continue that. But I think there's a huge risk that if they continue to talk about foreign interference with China, with India, this doesn't actually, most Canadians care about, can I buy a house? Can I pay for my groceries? All that kind of stuff. So I think the more that story dominates, and the more, and the Conservatives even saw that at the last time, right? They were starting to build away from, yes, it was fun to fight the Liberals on Chinese interference, but it didn't help them electorally at the end of the day. It was just a really fun thing for caucus to do. So they started shifting. So I think we will see a shift, but the impacts of this geopolitically are massive. And I think that will be a dominant story for quite a while.
Yeah. Okay, since we're on the topic of India, for those listeners who are trying to get their heads around this issue and this topic, Kathleen or Laura, could either of you explain what this issue is? Come on, Kathleen.
Don't all jump at once.
Sorry. So what the issue of India is overall,
Yes.
like, or what? Well, I mean, as folks have already said, the prime minister rose in the House on Monday. I was actually on the Hill at the time to do.
You were.
Yeah. And so it was a really dramatic day, as Laura had indicated. And it was dramatic for a number of reasons, because the prime minister rose in the House and he made the allegations that there was evidence, convincing evidence, I think was the word that he used, that the Indian government was involved in the murder of a Canadian man, a 45-year-old Canadian man on Canadian soil in Surrey, BC. Outside of his Gurdwara. And so that was pretty significant. And then because
Can I just ask, nobody in the House knew that this announcement was coming. Is that correct?
That's correct. No. The prime minister did brief the opposition leaders in advance, so they were aware. So he rose in the House and he made his statement, and that was quickly followed by statements from opposition leaders in the House. And so, and at the moment, and it's been widely reported, they were very unified in their support. Obviously, Pierre Poilievre agreed with the prime minister's kind of comments in the moment. Jagmeet Singh, the leader of the NDP, spoke in both English and Punjabi and had a very personal narrative that he shared. And then quite in quick succession, the foreign affairs minister came out with Minister LeBlanc, who's public safety, came out and basically said that they were expelling an Indian diplomat immediately, and that she was on her way to New York to the UN General Assembly to speak to her foreign affairs minister colleagues globally about the incident. And so that's the kind of TikTok, if that answers your question, Amanda. But I would just add this, that, and this is the important to the first question about India that you asked, I think, and this story of foreign interference more broadly that you raised. This is going to be a story with legs. Mainly because it's going to take a long time to get to the bottom of it, right? And so we've already seen, as Amanda Galbraith has just said, we've already seen massive fallout. We've seen the stopping of visas from the Indian side. We've seen the withdrawal or the chess matching of diplomat withdrawals. But it's really concerning because India is Canada's 10th largest trading partner You know, we have serious economy going back and forth. Things like fertilizer, things like lentils or pulses, things like oil and gas. Like there's a lot of stuff that goes back and forth, and so there will be economic impacts. And if we take the example, you know, we have to get to the bottom of whether it's true or not and what the evidence is. But it's not. We're not going to find that out right away. You know, we're not going to get to know that because it has to remain secret so the charges can be laid. But we do also know from the Prime Minister that Jody Thomas, who's his security advisor, had already been to India to speak to Indian officials. So had the head of CSIS. So there's some indication that some due diligence was really being done on behalf of the Prime Minister. Like, I don't think, you know, there's been this allegation that maybe he just wung it and stood up and did this, but there looks like there actually was some work, you know, and it really did kind of allow us to view the G20 meeting and the tensions and all the bad headlines that came out for the Prime Minister with Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Trudeau, that maybe we understand why it was so uncomfortable, you know, if these allegations were being made. Sorry.
And no, that's fabulous. And that was such a great explanation. I actually learned a lot. But I want to touch on that, the G20, because Trudeau went, I mean, what happened? His plane broke down. That was very unfortunate. But that was at the end of what the opposition, I'll say the Conservatives, I'll talk about them, were spinning as a big problematic meeting for Trudeau. And then they come back to Canada and find out on the first day that Parliament sits that actually this whole thing has been happening behind the scenes. And maybe I'll throw to Amanda just because of your party affiliation here. But Laura, please jump in also. As a Conservative, how do you message that then after weeks and weeks of going after the Prime Minister with the narrative that he didn't do enough at the G20? There obviously was issues with India. India didn't provide a plane to send him home. How do you spin that as the opposition once you find out that this big event has happened?
Candidly, I don't know if they have to do that much spinning. I mean, we can all retroactively say, hey, some of this makes sense. Candidly, I still think, for example, not attending the leaders' dinner, to me, like, even if you're pissed at India, it's G20. There's a lot of other countries there. Like, I still feel the Prime Minister's presence at the event was anemic for what it could have been. And I think that regardless of I'm not trying to say I understand everything that's going on behind the scenes, but it still felt a little. Also, I think candidly, the Conservatives weren't the only ones saying this, right? I think broadly most of the media was doing so. Although interestingly, I think as they learned about or heard the rumors of what was happening, you kind of saw the criticism and the coverage sort of like tail off a little bit, which if we'd read the tea leaves, actually Scott Reed was saying, he's like, this is kind of weird that no one's really pressing on this part. And then of course we get the news. So I think that, I don't think the Conservatives need to care too much about that. I think they need to be very careful about how they deal with this issue itself. In that, because it has impacts geopolitically, but also it has impacts electorally for all the parties, right? The Hindu community, the Sikh community are very powerful voting blocs in British Columbia, which is a very important electoral district for all three parties. Yep. So I think you'll see them approach it in like probably very carefully as they move forward. But yeah, honestly, if I was a Conservative, that'd be the last thing I'd be worried about.
And Laura, Amanda, I want to ask you, I'm going to give you a chance. I just want to ask you also the flip side, on the Liberal side, when you're traveling with the PM, you're getting this coverage and you know what's going on in the background. How do you deal with that as somebody who is responsible for that messaging?
Candidly, I think you wait, right? Like, you know what's about to come. You know that whether it's happening, maybe you don't know what's going to happen the first day the House sits, but you know that at some point in the next few weeks, you're going to be talking publicly about what happened. It is going to come out very quickly in very short order that this was not just a normal trip to India and this wasn't a normal G20 interaction among yourself, and not just India, but the other countries, right? Knowing what's going on, to Kathleen's point, India is a really important trading partner, not just for Canada, but globally. And so you know that if you're bringing this to your counterparts at the G20, they are also all of the sudden going to have a lot on their plate that they didn't plan on having. And it's going to be really difficult for them to make quick reactions, quick judgments, interact with you as a leader and, you know, your top officials that are with you, your fellow ministers that are with you in reasonable, authentic, and transactional ways, because how can you do that all of the sudden if there's this big piece that your intelligence, if you're, the UK, if your intelligence agencies now have to verify, right? That's going to be really challenging. I also want to circle back on something that Amanda was talking about, though, which is the local piece of this, right? There's the electoral piece. There's also what Amanda's doing, I think what I did, what most people did, which is call our South Asian and Indian friends and colleagues to make sure we're understanding the politics of this. Like the Indian and South Asian diaspora in this country is huge. And they are also now sitting there watching coverage of, their homeland, maybe their ancestral land, having done something pretty horrible to a place they now call home. And that's really hard, right? Especially when the nuances of what happened, when we're talking about the assertion, whether it's real or not, that India killed someone because they have a dissenting opinion from the government of the day in India. That gets really hard to understand. And our Sikh neighbors and our Indian neighbors are probably not totally okay right now because they've lost a community member who was killed. They also are now probably facing questions, just like we've all posed to them, about what is this? What does this mean? I don't understand. What's the difference between Khalistani and Sikh and Hindu? And I don't, please explain it. I don't understand. And that's also something that I think is really going to ripple and keep this story in the news for a really long time, because there's the big macro piece, there's the micro human element, and then to Amanda's point, there's the political element, which is this is a huge electoral piece for every party.
Okay, well, it's a huge topic, and as we've suggested, it's going to dominate a lot of the headlines for the next several weeks at least. But let's take a look back for a moment. The summer was, well, it was tricky. Let's start there.
There was a lot of news.
There was a lot of news this summer. Amanda mentioned, I think earlier, the somewhat difficult place that the Liberals found themselves in. Laura, I want to touch on that. We're heading into this new session. There was a cabinet shuffle in the summer, a lot of news around the Prime Minister. How is the party doing? Or maybe what can the party be doing to better position itself for this fall session?
What can the party be doing? I mean, first of all, they need to be having some really deep conversations internally, among the ministers, but also among staff about what are we doing? What's the plan? How do we get some message and communications discipline and stay on track? And also connect with Canadians, because it felt like they maybe weren't accomplishing that over the summer. I do think, we were talking about the House of Commons and starting off with a bang. It feels like they're turning a page. It feels like they are actively trying to get on track, listen to Canadians, respond to Canadians, and move towards, I hate to say more of a campaign posture, but some of that discipline and snappiness that we see during an election and a campaign. But they really need to keep doing that a lot. And I think they are. I hope they are. But I think that's why we're seeing the PM come out so strongly lately. That's why he's got his ministers out with really targeted things like bringing grocery CEOs and supply, all of the manufacturing CEOs to Ottawa to start talking about pretty big issues.
Yeah. And it's interesting when you contrast that with the summer that the Conservatives had. There was a big ad spend, a lot of emphasis put on changing both the tone and the look and the feel of both the party and the leader. Amanda, I'm curious about that spend, and I'm curious about what you think. Is this working for Pierre Poilievre? I mean, the polls would suggest that it is. His popularity is growing. Did the ads have a lot to do with that?
I just want to interject and say I hope Pierre's not listening, but I saw him last week and he looks great. He has buffed up. He, wow. He's
no comment.
Ready to be Prime Minister.
The ads are working. The ads are working. What do you mean, the greatest summer that ever happened for the Conservatives? I mean, I haven't seen the party this happy since 2006. Like, I remember in 2006, like throwback, because you could do stuff like this. Raheem Jaffer, who was an MP then, and I think Kathleen Monk, threw a "Let's Get Ready to Govern" party in Center Block, and it was it was wrecked. Like, I was like wandering around like hammered, like it was just we were everywhere. There was a band, like I can't imagine you're allowed to do any of that stuff anymore. But like, the happy days have not been around in the Conservative Party since like that era, I would say. So I think Conservatives are very happy and puffed up with themselves, and candidly, to a certain degree, maybe we need a little bit of this because, you know, we've been deep sixing our leaders within one kick at the can for a little while. So we're pretty vicious, for better or for worse. Unlike the NDP, which fascinates me because you guys have endless amounts of patience for your leaders. Like Conservatives,
just hold on to them.
Yeah, just love them to death. We're like, nope, you're done. So I think, but candidly, I do think they're being smart. They're being disciplined about things. I think you see even, you know, today it got reported on by CP, but let's not wade into the you know, gender politics issue to all MPs, like, which is really table stakes stuff for disciplined parties. But I think you see a lot of message discipline there. Pierre's makeover, whatever we want to call it, modest edits, new style. I think like modernized him makes sense. And there's certainly a feeling in the party. And I was really sad to actually miss this convention, but I couldn't make it work with going back to work and everything because I feel like it would have been the best convention other than the one that was at Stampede. There's a feeling of like a resurgence of the movement and kind of everybody getting together under the tent. Like you saw Brian Mulroney came out and said it's the best convention speech he's ever seen. Like his son posted that on, which is on, like, I would have never thought that would happen. You saw Peter MacKay on stage. So I think the Conservatives are in a good place. It's really early and there's lots of runway for anybody to come out and poke holes in this and that kind of thing. You know, and I think to the Liberals' credit, what they've been doing this last week, I still think they're the out of touchness of a 8-year, like a government this long in their terms. It's hard to overcome, to be honest. Like you don't have the staff you had in the beginning most of the time. They're there because they like the government salaries as opposed to believing in the call. Like it's just, there's a lot of stuff that happens the longer you're there. So I think we have to be careful and disciplined, but I think the party is very happy with itself right now and for good reason, given the polls and that kind of stuff. And I think that spend was actually really smart. It got out early, it got a ton of coverage, and people paid attention.
So Kathleen, I'm curious. So if the Conservatives had the greatest summer ever, and I agree, they may have had the greatest summer ever, how do the other parties respond? How does the government respond? How do the parties respond? Did the rehabilitation effort work for Poilievre? Is it lasting? Like, I'm so curious on your take on this one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that I agree with Amanda Galbraith. Like, for sure, they had a great summer, and the vibe coming off that convention was just exuberant. You know, people were on cloud 9 or 11, maybe, I'm not sure. But we have this saying in politics, you know, that when the polls are good, you kind of say, just another rogue poll, put your nose down to the grindstone and get to work, right? So the only concern I have is that maybe they're getting too intoxicated with their own vibe and are missing the fact that they, you know, this, I'm going to make a glasses reference here because of Pierre and his makeover and him taking away his glasses. But it's like maybe he's lost his depth perception. You know, because there's a real concern that this election is still 2 years off. I mean, maybe we don't want to hear that. Those of us who really love politics and could, you know, jump onto a campaign bus, especially Laura, probably, you know, for the next 36 days. But remember, most Canadians don't want another election. It's expensive, $600 million bucks, eats up a lot of oxygen. And so the government is going to do its best, you know, to avoid that. And so I am like, if I was advising Pierre, which of course he would take no advice from me, as he shouldn't, you know, you have to be careful because you've got to run this out for another 2 years. Now, advantage Conservative, because they have enough money to run this out for 2 years. Like they, unlike the other parties, right, are not in debt. They are rolling in dough, and they can keep $3 million every quarter ad campaign running. They could do that with the funds, you know, that they're yanking in every quarter in terms of the fundraising. The Liberals can't do that, and the New Democrats certainly cannot do that. They're still paying off debts and are nowhere close to having an election. But as an earned media girl, so that means just to define the difference, there's media like commercials that you pay for, and then there's earned media that we use in communications world where you've actually hustled to get a news headline or a front page of a cover or whatever. I'm more from that part of the practice, although I do a lot of paid media too. But earned media is what you do when you have no money. And that's what New Democrats do a lot of. We hustle to get a lot of earned media. And in the end, that can win. And I'll just give you one example, okay, that folks in Ontario, but perhaps across the country, can relate to. Right now, there's been a big scandal in Ontario about a thing called the Green Belt and about building new houses on the Green Belt. And it has been a scandal. I won't go into the details of it because it's not the focus of this podcast, but the Ontario government has spent a lot of money on paid advertising to try to turn that ship and change that narrative that they were only selling off the Green Belt because they needed to build homes. But guess what? It didn't work. Because all of the earned media headlines, all of the headline after headline after headline was, this was wrong. And his ministers got in trouble. He's had 2 ministers now that have resigned, a chief of staff. And frankly, as we've been on the air taping this, Premier Ford has in fact reversed his decision on the Green Belt entirely. And that's basically because of journalism hustle or earned media and kind of the work there. So I've kind of gone on a bit of a pivot from your question, but I think that the Conservatives have the ability to continue this charm offensive with Canadians and get more voters, but they do have to be careful of how long the race is to the next election, right? And it could be to 2025, and that's a long time. The economy may change. Potentially the players may change, but certainly the values and needs of Canadians may also change within that time too.
Okay, I want to jump in there because we're running out of time, unfortunately, because I could sit here with you guys all day. And I want to ask Laura about that because we talk about Pierre and the road to 2025. Let's talk about Justin Trudeau as well. A bit of a crazy summer for the Prime Minister. We saw a huge cabinet shuffle and also then followed by the announcement of his separation from his wife, which many are wondering, why a formal announcement came out about that, if that was a strategic move. I don't know if you can give us any insight on maybe what Trudeau is thinking in terms of the next year for him.
Laura, I'm so happy they're asking you about the divorce and not me. I just want to say, I'm like, you get the divorce question. All over to you, Laura.
So I think the divorce question, the reason there was a formal announcement is because I could be wrong. I'm pretty sure he will be the only leader to ever run, divorce leader to ever run. I think his father actually also separated while he was PM, but he didn't run afterwards, right?
Right.
So it is actually a pretty major historical deal in Canada. And also, we can't forget there's kids here, right? He has 3 children. This is a big deal. And so I think it was probably pure conjecture, but probably an effort to get the announcement out and then give his family some privacy and time to deal with that on their own.
Which it seems has happened.
It seems has happened, which, the media definitely deserves a round of applause for that and recognizing that that is a really difficult thing for 3 kids, between elementary and high school age to go through in the public eye.
Yeah.
But the next year for Justin Trudeau, I think is frankly going to be doing a lot of what Pierre Poilievre's doing, but to Kathleen's point, earned. Trying to do earned media, right? I think it's a little bit of reshaping his image as the person who understands Canadians, understands their issues and what they need, and that you can square, progressive social policy with the type of, fiscal and economic policy that Canadians need right now and are craving with affordability and housing. And I think it's trying to, this is such a terrible way to put it, but take the shine off him a little bit, right? Get back to his roots of door knocking, being out at pancake breakfasts and barbecues and Stampede and talking to people. It's one of the things that he does incredibly, incredibly well, is interact one-on-one with people, understand what they're saying to him, really listen, and take that back to his team. And my guess is that we're going to see a lot of that over the next year.
Okay, my final question. I don't know, Amanda, do you have any burning questions? Because I have one for Kathleen.
You go ahead. You go for it.
Kathleen, are we going to get to a point where the NDP leaves the agreement with the Liberals on a vote, or are we in this for the long haul on the supply and confidence agreement?
So I don't know the answer to that, concretely, but the advice I would give them if they ask me is work as hard as you can, as long as you can, make that deal work to the end, to extend the divorce marriage / analogy that I'm at great risk of doing as a divorcee myself. But I'll just say, if they are married, the Liberals and the Democrats right now, the New Democrats have to be the one that are, working to make that relationship work for as long as they can, for the good of Canadians, for the good of the economy, and for great policy. So they've got to be those ones who do that. And I'm sorry if you heard that banging. That's my son coming in the door from school.
Good. Okay, Amanda Galbraith, I'm going to give you also one last chance to add anything that you wanted to add, if there's anything.
I mean, no, I think it's, anyway, I think the NDP Liberal deal is interesting in that I don't quite get the analysis. I mean, maybe I could just do with Kathleen offline or whatever, but I feel like the NDP still get their lunch eaten by the Liberals all the time on it. Like, I don't see you guys distinguishing yourself as much as you could or should. And maybe that, like, even part of it when it was first rolled out, it was like 150 bullet points in a press. I'm like, no, you want like 4 things and I want to all understand it, right? I think maybe the dental care piece has stuck out, but but yes, I think regardless, Liberals and the NDP don't have the money the Conservatives do. So we can't force an election on our own. So I think we're in this for the long bit. I think there's a lot of risk to the Conservatives about getting too arrogant and not paying attention and not keeping your stick on the ice. But I think they're also, and Jenny Byrne, who's kind of the great mind behind a lot of this stuff, the Wizard of Oz, is very good at keeping her stick on the ice. So I have confidence that if they get offline, she'll probably knock them back.
I have no doubt. No doubt. All right. Well, this was absolutely fabulous. And we are definitely going to do this again, but with real dinner. But that is our episode for this week. We've loved this dinner party, and we really hope that everyone listening has as well. We want to thank our great friends, Kathleen, Amanda, and Laura, for joining us today. And hopefully we'll all get to do this soon in real life, maybe in Amanda's backyard. That would be lovely. I just invited us all over.
Anytime. I'd love to make that happen.
Don't forget to send us your feedback on this episode. We really would love to hear from you. And please find us on social media. A big shout out to Danny Horvitz for our theme music and to Tim Truax for your help in production.
We are back next week with another episode, so stay tuned. We'll talk to you soon.